Hello, and thanks for joining me as I continue the rebuild project on my 1993 Ford Mustang Cobra. Today we're getting started on taking off the upper intake manifold, and it's step one in the GT40 head rebuild project I got going on here. I've already gotten started with the basics. I've removed the air box, the mass airflow sensor and tube, and I also got the back bolt and bracket from the upper intake manifold as well. I'll talk more about that later. But basically, to get started here, the air box takes these two bolts right here. Remove those, air box comes right out. You got another two down here, one here for the bracket that holds the mass airflow sensor. Once you get that out, then you have enough room to wiggle the clamps loose that was holding the metal air tube here to the throttle body. And as you can see, I've labeled and covered everything. You know, mass airflow sensor, went ahead and covered it so spiders don't get in there. Want to be able to put everything back together, not have any problems. The biggest issue I've had so far is getting to that bracket that's in the back. It's the last bolt back here. It's under these cables. You can barely see the hole right in there. And that had this stud right here. So this stud is what holds the intake manifold on. This bracket sat on top of it, and you had this nut. And the only way to get it loose or get it off was to take the bracket from the other side as well. That I haven't seen on any other 5-liter head or intake manifold removal videos before. So that's something I ran into that I have not seen in any other videos. But other than that, everything's pretty straightforward. I have a line here from the throttle body that I removed. Another line here from the neck of the intake. Being this is a Cobra, it has the GT40 Cobra style intake, so it does not have the separate spacer. It's built into the neck. We've removed the plug for the throttle position sensor. We removed, that's the other end down here, removed the vacuum line from the EGR valve and the plug from the EGR valve. And I think that's it on this end. One thing I have left to do is to unhook the throttle cable. You can see it down in there, right in here. I believe it's just two clips and it comes right out. A little different than what I've seen on other 5-liter intakes. It has like a pop-in connector. Mine doesn't have that. And also down here, there's a hose. There's a hose attached to this thing right here. You can see it. I can get in there. This hose right here. Hands in the way, you can see the opening there. There you go. And as far as I can tell, I think that's everything holding the intake on. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen up all the remaining 5 bolts, and I want to try to remove this all as a one unit. I want to leave the throttle body, the idle air control valve, the EGR, throttle position, all that stuff on, just so I don't have to re-gasket and have all the parts laying around and save time having to put it all back together. So I'm going to go ahead, loosen up and remove these bolts and see if I can get this intake off. Alright, stay tuned. Alright, well, thanks for joining me. See, I got back here. I went ahead and removed the throttle cable. I popped it off. It did have a little pop off, I'll show you later. And I went ahead and had to remove the bracket as well. It just made it easier. Okay, we went ahead and got all these bolts out, which are a lot easier than I expected. They all broke free rather easily. Okay, now let's see. Okay, well, that's loose. That's good. It still feels like we got something holding in the back here. There's a hose or something back here. A vacuum. There's something back there. I'm gonna have to take a look at that. Alright, well, thanks for joining me. I'm back. I got the upper intake manifold off. There was a couple things that were holding me up after I got all the bolts loose. There was something still holding it in the back. I thought I had disconnected everything when I had gotten this hose here off, but it turns out there was all this stuff underneath that I didn't see. So I went ahead and popped off this PVC valve on the other side instead of taking this T off because it was too hard to get it from the back. So I left all that connected. Then I had to go ahead and disconnect this vacuum line that was attached here to the main vacuum T. And be careful while you're doing this. This is all one plastic piece and it's fairly expensive, and on a car this old I imagine it's pretty fragile, so I was real careful with that. And the hose was very old and stiff and didn't want to come off, so I had to spray just a little silicone lube on there, and that helped slide it off without too much effort. Then I also had these two little lines down here that I have taped up here that attached to these little guys underneath as well. So once I got all that disconnected, everything came off really easy. The intake just, no gasket to break free, it just lifted right out, real simple. I doubt it'll go back in that easily, but we'll see. One other note here in the back, I had this bracket here that I wasn't aware of until I started getting into it. So you need to remove this side first, and then once you loosen the top nut on there, then it'll come off. But other than that, it's a pretty straightforward job. I went ahead and taped up the vacuum line ends and labeled them, and I went ahead and cleaned up and taped up the top of the upper intake manifold. Pretty simple job, pretty straightforward, not a whole lot of tools needed. This is all the tools you'll need right here. Needed this to move the clamp on the vacuum line, your ratchet, pry bar for the hoses, a 1/2-inch wrench for the stud, got a 1/2-inch bolt for the intake manifold, or 1/2-inch socket for the intake manifold bolts. We got a 12mm and a 10mm, and a couple extensions, and I needed the universal joint, like I said, to access that one. That was the only thing I needed that for. But everything is pretty simple. Now I'm going to go ahead and get this all cleaned up, and then I guess the next step from here will be to remove the headers. As you can see, they're kind of old and discolored. I've already sprayed WD-40 on the bolts, hoping that'll help because they're pretty rusty. I imagine that's going to be an issue getting those guys off. They've been in there a while. So once I get these headers off, I'm going to spray some high temp header paint on those and go through the heating cycle of that in the oven. So I'll do a video documenting that. And that's about it for right now. Now I got the upper intake off. At least I got started on this project. Alright, well, thank you for watching today. I hope you found this video helpful. Stay tuned as I continue the rebuild project on this 93 Ford Mustang Cobra. Basically going to be rebuilding the GT40 heads on this engine. Alright, thank you very much for watching.